Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so pleased to have you all here. Okay, Building a Legacy for Women Artists is sponsored, as you all know, by the Women's Caucus for Art, which was founded in New York at the 1972 College Art Association meeting. Today, we have about 20 chapters in the Women's Caucus all across the country, plus members at large. And if you're here and you're not a member, I encourage you to join. It's a wonderful organization. Today we were going to explore the ways that artists, art historians, and leaders of art organizations are working to ensure that the art and accomplishments of women artists are preserved for present and future generations. And I'm so pleased to have on this panel, some of really our experts from all across the country here to speak to you. Legacy, here's our slate of speakers, which I'll show that again later, and I'll introduce everybody right before they talk. So the dictionary definition of legacy is just as you can see, a gift by will, especially of money or other personal property, a bequest, and then in a broader meaning, something transmitted or received from an ancestor or predecessor. We hear that word legacy a lot, I think, these days. People are talking about it. But, of course, for an artist, your legacy is a lot of tangible things, like all those paintings or works of art you've made that, are piled up in your studio that you have not sold, all your papers, your photographs, your documentation of your work, in addition to any kind of financial assets you might have. And a scholar, a curator, an art historian like myself, you have all your records, your research files, your images, your slides about the women artists you've worked on that need to go someplace after, our lives have ended. So we all have a lot of planning to do and thinking about to preserve our legacies. And, of course, in a broader sense, our legacies are more the intangible things, like the ideas that have been passed on, the activism of artists, things that have changed the society around us that are passed on to future generations, which is probably the biggest thing we can do. And, of course, we all wonder about our personal legacy as professionals or artists all the time. Is what we have done, we've created, we've published, what we've taught our students somehow going to last into the future. And Susan Fisher-Sterling, who's the director of the Women's Museum, is going to talk to us about her museum and the importance of getting a work in a museum. And we will also hear about archiving records, ways we can do that. And, of course, today we have the new challenge of electronic records and trying to figure out how to archive them. And all artists need to be educated about how to preserve their legacy, and the rest of us all need to be helping people. Everyone needs help with this, and that's one thing that thinking about this topic has made me realize, there's a lot of time and energy that goes into preserving the legacy for any one person. I hope you're going to hear about some new ideas, strategies, resources today from the speakers. We have the benefit of years since 1972 of a lot of organizations and people that have worked very hard to bring attention to and recognition for women artists. There's feminist scholars and activists. We have the Guerrilla Girls and the institutions. The College Art Association, of course, established its committee on women about the same time as the WCA was formed. And these groups have made a big difference. And a lot of them, activists in this, early CAA presidents and so forth, were actually some of the founders of the Women's Caucus for Art. And today, as you all notice, the CAA leadership has changed dramatically, and you look around the rooms, there's a lot of women in leadership organizations. The Feminist Art Project and the Institute for Women at Art at Rutgers that we'll be hearing about are doing dramatic efforts to help preserve the legacy of women artists. We have over 3 decades of the Women's Art Journal that's edited by Joan Marter now, and we have gone from not having a single woman artist in any of the major art history surveys to now having a National Museum of Women in the Arts that's over 25 years old. But still, as we know, there are great disparities in how much art by women is valued and recognized. How many galleries have solo shows by women artists? How many museums in the country have a major solo exhibition in every given year? walk through a museum, and I do that sometimes, start counting, and maybe if you're lucky, you might have 5% of the work on display that's by a woman. Okay. And I'm curator at the U.S. Capitol, and actually I started thinking this morning, we're not so bad. We have 16 statues by women artists out of the 100 and the 100 state statues in the Capitol. So you know what, that's 16%. That's not so bad. And we have one more that's being made by a woman artist. But then I also thought, I started in that job in 1985. There's been a lot of new statues that have come in since then, and not one statue has been made, full standing statue, has been made by a woman artist since I've been there in all those years. Okay. But the Capitol has one interesting statue in the rotunda, which is the one of Abraham Lincoln. And the woman that got the commission for that, which was the first commission by the government of a work of art by a woman artist, was by Vinnie Reed. And at the time she signed the contract, she was only 18 years old. So it's kind of inspiring to think she was a teenager at the time. Okay. And just a few years ago in 2009, we had a bust of Sojourner Truth unveiled, and it was done by artist Lane, who just received the Lifetime Achievement Award last night. Okay. Okay, and you start thinking about how many artists, women artists, have a museum dedicated to them. You know, you can think of Georgia O'Keeffe. How many museum artists have their studio preserved where you can go visit? Again, you can think of Georgia O'Keeffe. How many women artists have a huge catalog raisonné of all their work? Again, Georgia O'Keeffe. There are not a lot of others, really, when you think about it. And I'm in a group that's called the Catalog Raisonné Scholars Association. I started looking at the list of 250 members of all the people that are working on Catalog Raisonné, which is, you know, a systematic catalog of every work by a given artist. And there were only a little over 10% of people were listed as working on women. And even I myself are enlisted for working on men for that group. So there's still a lot of attention. I noticed something in the College Art Association bag that we were given. There was a list of new books, 24 books, 3 of them about women. So again, you know, we've gone from 0% to maybe, or 1% to 5 to 10%. So it's better, but you know, there's still room to go. The number of major biographies of women artists also is relatively small, and there are women artists who have created foundations to help preserve their work. Joan Marter will be telling us about that, and Janice Nesserchu will be telling us how much good an artist can do with good estate planning to do good things with her work. Because art made by women is generally lower in value, I mean, there are some women now whose art is up there in price, but most women, 90% of them, is much lower than any man. Her lifetime of work may be dispersed at auction or thrown out because nobody wants it. And if somebody isn't very famous, it might cost a lot more to have a conservator work on your painting than you could ever sell it for. So it's not a lot of incentive to keeping it around. And if you don't have documentation of who the artist is, nobody knows, then again, it's not going to get preserved. Okay. As an art historian, trying to preserve and talk about women artists, the legacy of women artists has been important, and that's why I joined WCA way back in the 70s. I wasn't one of the early members, but I was teaching art history at Trinity College in Washington, and those were the days when not one single woman was in any of the art textbooks. So I made the students do extra readings and essays and things like that, and that's when I joined WCA. And the College Art Association was in Washington that year, so I mounted an exhibition. They were really working to get exhibitions of women artists all over the city, and you'll hear more about that year. Go ahead. 1979 was a big year because that was the first sort of official Lifetime Achievement Award ceremony that was at the White House with President and Mrs. Carter, and started our tradition of just about every year having this wonderful ceremony, which has inspired me every year. We just had a beautiful one last night. And the catalogs are really important documentation of a lot of these artists that summarizing their life and their achievements, which is an important thing that WCA has done. Then I became active in the local chapter when, again, the College Art was meeting in Washington in 1991, and I juried the national exhibition and got involved in the chapter, and of course ended up, getting big chapter president. And then I came to the national board meetings to represent my chapter, and then ended up on the national board for about 10 years. So I'm still trying to support it. But it's what I love about it is things like the awards, and about the mission of the organization is still so important, I think, for all of us. Go ahead. All right, there, that's good. So I actually wrote my doctoral dissertation on a Philadelphia modernist named Arthur B. Carles, and he went to and taught at the Pennsylvania Academy. There were a lot of women students that kept painting and teaching their whole lives, and I went around and interviewed a lot of them. This is a young me with a woman that had saved her painting that she had done in Carl's class around 1918, where he put an X on it, showing that it was a good painting, and she had kept it. So I got to know a lot of these people through interviewing them, and then ended up writing about some of their work. And one of them was Jane Piper, who was a wonderful artist in Philadelphia, just dedicated to going to her studio, a wonderful teacher. She studied with Carles and also Hans Hofmann. She had a gallery that showed her work regularly and did small catalogs. The Woodmere Art Museum gave her a retrospective, and some of her work is in museums. Go ahead. And so some of the little publications, I curated one show for her that went to college organizations. I interviewed her for the Archives of American Art. But here, there's never been a major book about her, and her daughter has 100 paintings that, trying to figure out what to do with them. And she's one of the really relatively successful people whose work sells now for more than it did when she was alive. Okay. In contrast, she had her best friend, Muy Glidden, is also just a wonderful painter. I think her work is so beautiful, but she was very shy, much more reticent about showing her work, didn't really have a regular gallery, but just kept painting. She did these abstractions kind of based on her experiences in nature, beautiful sketches. I went to see her, this photograph of her near the end of her life, and I got a gallery to agree to do a show for her. And she backed out. She and her family backed out of it, and they were resisting having one of her paintings donated to the Pennsylvania Academy, thinking that if it was hanging in a relative's living room, it would be seen more than being in a museum. Not really understanding that really tremendous importance of being on the map by being in a museum and having your work preserved by an institution. So I'm hoping that there'll be some more shows of her work. I'm hoping her family has held on to things because it's well worth seeing. Another friend of Jane Piper's was named Kita Broadhead, and she actually lived to be 101 and a half, still painting, still living in her house by herself, and studied with Carles for over 20 years, from when she was at the Academy from 1918 until he ended his career. And her work spanned from more realistic representational things to these amazing abstractions towards the end of her life. And she does have work in museums, and for her 100th birthday, the Hollis Taggart Gallery did a retrospective show that I got to work on for her. I also did an article for the Women's Art Journal. And towards the end of her life, with the support of a lot of people, then there's a record of her work. But again, her son is trying to exhibit her work and sell it, and trying to find other places to exhibit it. Okay. This woman actually was in a Carles class with Kita Broadhead. And I talked to her once on the phone in the 1970s about Carles. I never asked to meet her or to go see her work. She died. The gallery got her whole estate, really beautiful paintings. They asked me to write something about her. And no letters, papers, or anything. Well, I knew Kita was in the class with her. So I said, Kita, what do you remember about her? She says, nothing. I never talked to her. I didn't like her. So there was my lead on her. But her work is really strong, and it's really sad that her story won't ever be told because of that. Okay. Another story about legacy is an artist, that Mary Hood, who all I knew about her studying with Carl's was I had found one letter where she thanked him for his class in 1940. That's all I knew about her, but I had her on my list of Carl's students. And I knew her daughter was also a Carl student, but I really didn't know anything about them. And their work is really beautiful. What had happened, the daughter had lived with the mother after she was divorced, and they both died in 1967. When they died, the will was that everything in their house should be auctioned. They didn't leave any of their paintings to anybody in their family. And luckily, her son-in-law bought as many of their paintings as he could at an auction and put them in this attic for his daughter, who was interested in art. And 40 years later, she started pulling them out and looking at them and seeing they were really beautiful. And she had known her, and she's actually came here today, so you can meet her, but she had known her grandmother and her aunt, but not really her biography. So here's the mother, Mary Hood, and then the next one is going to go ahead. The daughter, Agnes Hood Miller. And the Woodmere Museum just agreed to do a show on them, and I had a really interesting time working with Sarah, emailing back and forth as she discovered biographical facts about these women. The show is beautiful. The work is really beautiful, but they apparently didn't value it enough to make a real plan for preserving it. Okay. And here's the catalog that was done for that show and the exhibit. And another example where publication can make a big difference is Amelie Rothschild was a Baltimore painter and sculptor, very prolific, but she, again, sort of centered on her community and her family, and she left like 1,500 works of art when she died. Her daughter, fortunately, was married to a publisher and designer in Italy, and they spent years and put this massive 500-page book together for her work, which they call like a portable museum of her art. So, I mean, that's one way that some people can do to preserve legacy. Okay. Then the sort of worst case scenario when an artist gets discouraged, this is an artist who has a work in the Capitol, the portrait monument, that was commissioned to celebrate women getting the vote. And so this is in the Capitol, but she had trouble sustaining herself towards the end of her life, and actually in the 1930s, it's in the newspaper where she actually, in front of the reporter, she's smashing her own sculptures, saying if she can't sell them, she'd rather smash them. Eventually, the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress saved her things, and there are people researching her just now. Okay, all right. So we're going to start with our first speaker after me, which is Ann Schwartz, who's of the Savannah College of Art and Design, and for a number of years beautifully managed the WCA Lifetime Achievement Award program and is one of the moving forces in the Feminist Art Project. She will focus on the impacts of public recognition through the awards program and the wide-ranging strategies to gather, disseminate information about, and promote scholarly examination of feminist art implemented by the Feminist Art Project.
Thank you very much, Barbara. I have a kind of strange request. I just remembered I'm supposed to videotape my talk, and I forgot. If somebody has a phone, they would videotape me. I would really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Okay, go ahead. Changing the Future, the Women's Caucus for Art and the Feminist Art Project. The Women's Caucus for Art, WCA, Lifetime Achievement Awards, begun in 1979, and the Feminist Art Project, TFAP, started in 2005, came into existence in their respective eras due to similar interests in dialogue, documentation, and recognition of feminist art practices. Until recently, the WCA Lifetime Achievement Awards have been the only accolade devoted to women in the visual arts. The award is an opportunity to reflect on the accomplishments of a select group and create a record through the awards events and catalog. With the award, important contributions receive much deserved attention. In 2005, TFAP developed out of the desire to capitalize on the unique synchronicity of multiple major museum exhibitions of feminist art. TFAP focuses on expanding the community, increasing opportunities, and broadening the discourse. It now includes a broad range of activities. In this discussion, I'll focus on TFAP at CAA because I started it and coordinated many of its activities from its inception in 2005 until 2014. This paper will outline the separate histories of the WCA Awards and TFAP, the systems they have created to remember the past and change the future, and the solutions they offer in diversifying art and academia. My colleague Ferris, Olin, will continue talking about TFAP when she comes to the podium. I want to reflect on what's been accomplished by WCA and TFAP and then consider how they offer directions for the future. I'll start with the WCA Awards, then discuss the origins of TFAP, and consider the two in relationship to one another and what contributions each has made. Studying WCA Awards history gets you up close to a who's who of feminist art. The awards began in 1972 as an outgrowth of WCA's desire to champion women in the art world. WCA was born out of a moment in which there was a strong desire to counter professional discrimination, gain opportunities for women in the visual arts fields, and network. The awards, as we know them today, came later. Anne Sutherland Harris was the first president of WCA. She would later become the first honor awards chair in 1977. Many women were involved in the inception of the awards. From the start, the award celebrated accomplishment and achievement. As the Guerrilla Girls would mockingly and ironically note in 1988, women artists were not burdened with success early on, and that one of the, quote, advantages of being a woman artist included knowing your career might pick up after you're 80. It was and is an award unlike any other. Continuous annual awards recognizing lifetime achievement for women artists really didn't exist prior to the invention of the WCA Honor Awards. They originated from several divergent but simultaneous factors. Judith K. Brodsky, third WCA president, organized the first WCA conference in Los Angeles in 1977. The previous two presidents had organized a session at earlier CA conferences, but the first full WCA conference was initiated by Brodsky. It was held at the same time in the same locale as the CA conference that year, and Brodsky enlisted local Los Angeles women to help with its implementation. The women's building leadership, consisting of art historians Arlene Raven and Ruth Isken, along with graphic designer Sheila de Bretteville, as well as artists Ruth Weisberg and June Wayne. Weisberg brought together a group of California women artists to establish the Los Angeles chapter of the WCA to help with the conference. Additionally, Brodsky organized an exhibition of work by WCA artists, which was mounted at the renowned Women's Building. She invited 24 women curators and art critics from different parts of the United States to select artists from their regions. Brodsky also obtained the first National Endowment for the Arts grant ever issued for feminist activity. Not enough for a full catalog, but not enough for a poster that documented all the artists, designed by de Bretteville. Lucy Lippard was invited by Raven to be the keynote speaker at the conference convocation, which was held at the Women's Building. And the witch Z Budapest, I'm showing you here, talked on one of the panels and wove such a powerful spell that the spellbound audience only left the room when the executive secretary of the CAA came in to evacuate the room for the next panel. Following the main conference events, a closing celebration was held at June Wayne's studio, in which art historians Linda Nochlin and Anne Sutherland Harris received the first WCA awards ever for their incredible accomplishment of curating and realizing their massive corrective exhibition, Women Artists, 1550 to 1950, at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. The show traveled to the Brooklyn Museum. The exhibition catalog became a standard reference on feminist art. So in a sense, the awards started at the 1977 conference, but they became official under the next president, Leanne Miller. And Charlotte Robinson, who was then serving as the chair for the 1979 WCA conference. Additionally, Marilyn Green with the Workshop for Careers in the Arts and Eloise Schlatter of the Coalition of Women's Art organizations also were instrumental in bringing the awards into existence. Brodsky had brought Joan Martyr, the wife of the then vice president, to be the keynote speaker at the second CAA annual conference held in New York in 1978, thus creating a connection between the White House and the WCA that resulted in Joan Marter becoming instrumental in hosting the initial formal award ceremony at the White House in 1979, when the WCA held its third annual conference in Washington, D.C. Through Mondale's assistance, President Jimmy Carter and his wife Rosalind bestowed the awards at the White House themselves to Louise Nevelson, Alice Neal, Selma Burke, Isabel Bishop, and Georgia O'Keeffe in absentia, followed by a repeat ceremony for WCA members at the conference, which was held elsewhere. Artist Muriel Magenta, who I noticed came in, one of the later presidents of WCA, commented to me that the energy of that award ceremony was extraordinary and motivating. The Feminist Art Project came into existence because of a unique moment in recent history. In 2005, several large-scale mainstream museum exhibitions of feminist art were announced, with openings planned for 2007. Several women, no, it's okay. This is a slide that relates to the New Orleans Awards. Louisiana had not ratified the Equal Rights Amendment, and so there was a lot of dissension in WCA about whether or not the conference should be held there. And so a group of WCA members went there, had performances, had events, but they cooked their own food, sometimes on the street, so they wouldn't have to give any money to the city of New Orleans and its proprietors. And then another group held an alternate awards in Washington, D.C., same year, 1980, but for important feminists who had made a mark on society at large. Several women, including Judy Chicago, Arlene Raven, and Susan Fisher Sterling, to my left, Judy Brodsky and Ferris Olin, also to my left, began focusing on how to capitalize on this unique moment, build momentum, and optimize it. Judy C., as she was called in this situation to differentiate her from Judy Brodsky, and Arlene Raven organized some meetings that became Overcoming Erasure and later the Feminist Art Project. This was at the first meeting at Gail Levin's home, as the caption says, and I said to Judy C., I want to take your picture. She turned, tucked her fingers in her pockets, and gave me this big smile. She wasn't smiling before that. Separately, Judy Brodsky and Ferris Olin were crafting ideas for ways to create broad recognition of women in the arts at Rutgers University through exhibitions and other activities such as lectures, publications, and symposia to celebrate the Year of the Woman, which was inspired by the upcoming 35th anniversary of the Dana Women Artists Series in 2006. This meeting was held in May 2005 at art historian Gail Levin's home in New York City, where the women in attendance, artists, art historians, and curators, were asked how they would individually capitalize on this upcoming opportunity in 2007. I realized that College Art Association's annual conference was scheduled for New York City in February of 2007, and thought a panel would be worth pursuing, since panels focusing on feminist art were still occasional at CAA at that time. Others in attendance suggested exhibitions, programming, and publications. More meetings were held that summer, and into the fall, Gail Levin and others contacted Brodsky and Olin, and after some discussion with me, Judy Chicago, Arlene Raven, and Susan Fisher Sterling, they decided to visit Judy Chicago, Judy C., in New Mexico. Brodsky and Olin then took over the project, turning it from an amorphous set of activists promoting feminist art at this unique moment into an organization with an office at Rutgers University, 2 assistants, and I must admit I'm very, very impressed by this, and always have been, a parking space and a telephone number. If anyone's associated with the university, they know that's pretty amazing. And they did it in a week. My idea for a panel turned into a full day of panels, and the day was a success. The room was packed all day, making available seats a rare commodity. Some people stayed put despite their bodily needs to avoid losing theirs. The audience was intergenerational, including men, women, and trans men and women. The enthusiasm was high throughout the day. Alongside the day of panels, an exhibition of feminist art was scheduled to coincide with the conference. Ceres Gallery in Chelsea, a feminist cooperative gallery, offered space. Phyllis Rosser, the artist, is very involved with that gallery, and she came up to me after one of the meetings and said, "I have a place for you to have your exhibition." Leslie King Hammond curated and created Agents of Change, Women, Art, and Intellect, an incredible exhibition. She's an art historian, curator, administrator extraordinaire. I did the fundraising and a lot of the background organizational activities. Art administrator Dina Muller acted as registrar and supported the installation, and curator Lowry Stokes Sims installed the show. Holland Cotter positively reviewed the show in the New York Times, calling it, quote, "a modest but timely arrival." Many people were committed to the project and propelled the day of panels and exhibitions forward into the future. Connie Tell joined TFAP as an administrator and helped expand the activities considerably. She's an artist as well as being a very capable administrator. For the 2008 CA conference in Dallas, Dina Muller and Susan Fisher-Sterling chaired the TFAP panel, "The Glass is Half Full, Embedding Feminism and Feminist Art." But one panel didn't prove satisfying, so Brodsky and Olin asked me to organize another day of panels for the 2009 CA conference in Los Angeles. In building the structure of TFAP, Brodsky and Olin invited other organizations and institutions to become founding members of TFAP. Among those founding program partners were the College Art Association under the leadership of Susan Ball, at that time executive director, who agreed to host TFAP for a full day of sessions during each CA annual conference. Also, WCA was one of the founding partners. Developing TFAP at CA into an exciting forum to discuss feminist art became possible because of the increasing interest among artists, art historians, and curators in feminist art, and CAA recognized that growth. In order to avoid having the TFAP at CA days of panels become my property and associated with me and my perspective, I arranged with Brodsky and Olin to become the overall coordinator, and in that role, I was able to select different leading-edge feminist scholars and artists for each year to be the organizers of the event through 2014. Art historian Maria Busek's day of panels at the 2010 Chicago CAA annual conference was held in a slightly smaller room, which remained cramped and packed all day. The panels included broad-based discussion of sexuality and popular culture. Within CA's board, though, concern arose that TFAP at CA was being privileged over the affiliated societies by being given a whole day for its sessions. The issue raised was the fact that TFAP offered free admission, and thus people attending the TFAP sessions were getting a free ride from CAA. Brodsky and Olin showed CAA officers photographs of the audience at the 2009 day of panels, and all of them were wearing conference name tags, which indicated paid CAA registration. But CAA remained distressed and felt it was providing a free meeting space and free audiovisual support to non-members. Rather than continuing to try and appease the CAA board and potentially have to change or sacrifice some of the structure they'd put in place, Brodsky and Olin decided to move off-site for the 2011 conference. Even though they moved off-site, CAA continued to promote TFAP at CAA in their special events section and publish panel abstracts. Brodsky and Olin secured the auditorium of the Museum of Arts and Design for the next TFAP day, which was at the CAA New York conference in 2011. Art historians Johanna Burton and Julia Bryan Wilson focused on a more politicized discussion. The sessions they planned pulled in a full house, necessitating that audience members sit on the stage and in the aisles. Many high-profile art historians and artists attended. Despite moving off-site, the day was a major success, as defined by the level of audience members in attendance. Artists Alana Mann and Audrey Chan, I'm showing you now, organized the 2012 TFAP at CAA. They called their day Shares and Stakeholders, and focused attention on the range of what's happening now in feminist art and what is being planned for the future. Mann and Chan successfully arranged for TFAP at CA to be held at the Los Angeles Museum of Contemporary Art. Just to tell you, if you don't know, they're partners in performance art, and if you've never heard of them, I encourage you to look at their website. Separately, Audrey Chan does a performance as the Asian Judy C, and she's spot on, and she says whenever she dresses up as Judy C, she said she lives life balls out. So they had this podium designed, this cover designed for the podium that was actually a skirt because they wanted to have this be a totally dressed up space. Catherine Morris, curator of the Elizabeth A. Sackler Center for Feminist Art, has organized the 2013 TFAP at CAA Day of Panels, which will be held at the Brooklyn Museum and will focus on the intersections between feminism, art, and museums. The Day of Panels has become an institution and is currently scheduled to run through 2014 with art historian Jenny Klein managing the day next year in Chicago, and she may have an artist alongside as her collaborator. In 2012, Brodsky and Olin decided to step down from managing TFAP, since at the same time they were stepping down from the directorship of the Institute for Women in Art at Rutgers, IWA. They began implementing their succession plan, and Tatiana Flores, an art historian at Rutgers, is now the director of both the IWA and TFAP, with Connie Tell continuing as executive officer of TFAP and as deputy director of the IWA. Both WCA and TFAP were born out of the need for better treatment of women. For WCA, the lack of access in academia and the art world were key issues. Similarly, TFAP was born out of a desire to expand the discussion of feminist art and make it central rather than occasional and peripheral. Both developed from a problem with CAA's treatment of women, but as a democratic membership organization, CAA recognized the impact of feminist art on its membership and in the field and has continued to provide a platform, even if that platform has taken a different shape over time. Both the WCA and TFAP eventually became embedded in CAA, which bespeaks the organization's flexibility and member orientation enough to allow things to unfold in this way. The missions of both organizations began as a way to provide an open forum for academic discussion about feminist art that I want to note was intended from the beginning to include artists as a central part of that discussion. Each took its natural form reflective of the values at that moment. The WCA Awards were a way to give awards to women at a time when women were recognized only occasionally by CAA. It was significant from the start to document the activities, and the awards catalog served that purpose. Documentation and promotion of women's activities has been a main focus of the women's movement, countering the erasure of women's involvement in academia and the art world. Thus, the WCA Awards would convey the untold story of many women's accomplishments. The catalog was straightforward in promoting equity. While the WCA was a membership organization that sought to counter CAA neglect by the honoring of individual women through awards, in contrast, TFAP was a crowdsourced effort with no membership. As such, it has a kind of freedom to adapt and change. TFAP has a social media format and is responsive to whatever interests and energies develop. It put feminist art scholarship in the forefront of its activities in a serious and impactful way. Its efficiency and professionalism make a huge crowd possible. Now it is a broad-based organization with the Day of Panels functioning as only one of its many events and activities. I just have to mention there are cards up front for the Day of Panels this Saturday at the Brooklyn Museum. WCA Awards and TFAP both offer opportunities to celebrate feminist art. WCA Awards have become a significant and high-profile event. TFAP provides sites for discourse about feminist art. WCA continues to be a membership organization that exists to support the needs of its members, whereas TFAP is whatever it needs to be to serve anyone who wants to participate. Both reflect the zeitgeist of their moment of origin. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think TFAP still wants to gather any kind of feminist projects and things that people have all over the country, on the website, right? And really, so everybody should try to remember to put in when you do an exhibition or something like that. I don't think Ferris Olin, after all this, needs much introduction, as you've just been hearing about her, but she has recently been a distinguished professor of art and library science and founding co-director, as you heard, with Judy Brodsky for the Institute for Women in the Arts at Rutgers. And she was one of last year's WCA Lifetime Achievement Awardees. One of our past presidents used to say, this is the closest thing to the Academy Awards for women artists is our Lifetime Achievement Awards. She will describe the range of activities and the impact of the Institute, which is grounded in Rutgers University's longtime commitment to the legacy of women artists and feminist art activism.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes, okay. To my mind, this session represents the African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child. Go ahead. Each speaker is pursuing ways to ensure the recognition of the aesthetic and intellectual impact of women in the visual arts and on the cultural landscape, as Mimi Shapiro admonished us in the 1970s with this print. I have partnered with each of today's speakers to counter the erasure of women artists, and it's a pleasure to share the panel with them today. Rutgers Institute for Women in Art takes a three-pronged approach to ensure the legacy of women artists: exhibitions and programs, research, documentation, and scholarship, and curricular development. Although we work within a university, our reach extends beyond our campuses across the state, nationally, internationally, and virtually to transform the world of art and visual studies. Note that I'm using the term we in referring to the IWA. This is because I have spent 4 decades at Rutgers operating under a guiding principle that is feminist, that of collaboration. A dedicated team of individuals who work to attain its mission and goals staffs the IWA, and we could not have accomplished all that we have done so far in its first 6 years. I want to acknowledge them. In addition, the 4 decades of history of feminist art activism at Rutgers involved many other visual arts professionals. I want to recognize Joan Marter as a pioneer in establishing the feminist art as an area of scholarship at Rutgers, along with this week's awardees, artist awardees Joan Semo and Martha Rossler. And as you will see as I go through my talk, Judith K. Brodsky and I have together developed many of the programs described this afternoon since our initial collaboration in 1976. She's the founding co-director of the Institute for Women in Art, and as a team, we conceived and established many of the new initiatives as well as expanded projects I had already begun. Rutgers has the largest constellation of scholars teaching and doing research on women and gender studies in the United States, over 300, and it offers a PhD in the field. The university is also home to an impressive number of centers and institutes advancing women's leadership in diverse public arenas. The IWA is one of the 9 units that comprise the Institute for Women's Leadership Consortium. The consortium and our many faculty members catalyze research and the development of scholarly projects, interdisciplinary collaborations, and curricular transformation focused on feminist concerns. Although the IWA was established in 2006, when the university president appointed Judy and me to head it, there was already at Rutgers a very long history and a presence of feminist artists and art historians on campus. I want to give you some background history and then describe our many efforts to acknowledge and maintain our feminist art heritages. The cornerstone of the IWA was laid in 1971 when Joan Snyder, a 1962 graduate of Douglas College, then the largest women's college in the United States and based at Rutgers, made an intervention of great import. As a student at Douglas, she knew firsthand that women students lacked any female artist role models, as you can see in this picture of Jeff Hendricks teaching a group of the students at Douglas. The art department only hired white men as faculty members and only showed works by men on the art gallery's walls. And it wasn't actually until 1975 that a woman artist was appointed to a tenure-track position in the art department. As a visual artist, Snyder also experienced, like many women artists, the difficulty of getting exhibitions in galleries and museums. Challenged by her mentor to stop complaining and do something about it, Snyder approached the then college library director with a proposal to use the library's lobbies as a gallery space in which to exhibit works by women. Snyder volunteered to be the first curator of the Women Artists series. I became the series curator in 1994, and in 2006, Judy joined me as co-curator when the series became one of the programs administered by the Institute for Women in Art. Now in its 42nd year of showing works by emerging and established contemporary women artists, the Mary H. Dana Women Artists Series has been an important venue for more than 450 artists who have shown in its galleries. This is an installation by Yves Sandler. And many artists who showed in the first years of the series were pioneers, you'll recognize this work, of feminist art. Exhibiting artists have been selected by the curators and or by juries impaneled to review packets submitted in response to an open call. Throughout its history, the series has documented its exhibitions with printed catalogs and now sometimes electronically. Contributing essayists have included Lawrence Alloway, Lucy Lepard, Linda Nochlin, Joan Marter, Michelle Wallace, Tanya Sheehan, Tatiana Flores, and Helen Molesworth. 2 books of interviews with artists who showed in the first decade of its history were published under the title Lives and Works, Talks with Women Artists, and I see one of the co-authors in the audience, Joan Martyr. And in 1986, the Women's Caucus for Art recognized the Dana Women Artists Series with a special commendation during its annual recognition awards ceremony. To celebrate its 40th anniversary, the Institute mounted a virtual exhibition saluting all the artists who have shown in the Dana Women Artists Series, and I invite you to visit the site. In addition, Judy and I have continued to curate IWA exhibitions at other venues in the university and elsewhere that have included retrospective exhibitions of works by Faith Ringgold, Audrey Flack, the Guerrilla Girls, group shows that introduced Indian women artists and artists of South Asian diaspora, African women artists, and then just this fall, a festival of events centered on women artists from the Middle East and its cultural diaspora, under the umbrella of Fertile Crescent Gender, Art, and Society. There were 7 core shows featuring 24 artists curated by Judy and me, along with another complementary 7 shows that brought together also more than 50 lectures, performances, symposia, and screenings. Judy and I brought together in partnership for the first time the premier academic institutions in New Jersey, Rutgers and Princeton University, the Institute for Advanced Study, the Arts Councils of Princeton and West Windsor, and the public libraries of New Brunswick, East Brunswick, and Princeton to sponsor activities. This multiplicity of events introduced our academic and regional audiences to the breadth of work being done by women artists across the globe and opened up discussions on difficult topics. In addition, we videotaped many of our programs and mounted them on our website to make them accessible to people who are unable to attend. Other partnerships allow for diverse programming opportunities in the New York area and elsewhere. For the past 7 years, the IWA and AIR Gallery have organized a 2-part series of feminist art panels during Women's History Month at the Tribeca Performing Arts Center and the Brooklyn Museum. We've brought together artists, collectors, curators, critics, and scholars to discuss cutting-edge topics. This March, the series will focus attention on the fearsome BMI, women, artists, and the body. We also collaborate with an organization called Art W to present salons in New York City, at which women artists, critics, and curators converse about their work. Just last month, more than 60 visual arts professionals and enthusiasts joined us for a look at domesticity in the art of women artists when the curators of the current Mary Cassatt show at the Zimmerli Museum and the contemporary artist Betty Blank discussed the difference in the visions of artists of the 19th and 21st centuries in relation to women and domesticity. We expanded the reach of the Art W Salon series to Miami and sponsored an event at Art Basel Miami and Art Asia in which a panel discussed perspectives on the impact of art of Asia and the Middle East on contemporary art at the Zadok Gallery. And the gallery has invited us back again to plan another event for Art Basel Miami this December. Simultaneously with the advent of the Mary H. Dana Women Artists Series and the development of the then burgeoning field of women's studies, I began to work with the Rutgers University Libraries to develop a collection of books and primary source materials on the activities of individual women artists and women's art organizations. Starting with my experiences as an undergraduate art history major in the mid-1960s, then as a graduate student in the early 1970s, and later as a PhD candidate in the late 80s into the 90s, and throughout my multiple careers at Rutgers, beginning as a director of the art library and later as an academic administrator and founding director of 3 research institutes, I was well aware of the difficulty in finding published and primary research materials with women's involvements in the arts. Although I was privileged to experience the transformations of the field of art history, especially with the revisions of the survey books and the burgeoning number of women's studies titles on publishers' lists, I recognized that women still went missing and that documents about them were buried or lost. Women and gender studies information, and especially those on women in the visual arts, are often hard to discover and to use. And for example, here you see Georgia O'Keeffe's letter, which we have in an archive that is for the Francis Grant papers, and Francis Grant was an activist to better the relationship between the U.S. and Latin American countries. It's not in an art archive, but it's in another kind of archive. Typically, the archives are based on themes of American studies or literature or family papers. Also, the information is highly interdisciplinary, requiring scholars to understand research methodologies. And last but not least, significant information resources are often published as gray literature. That is, exhibition checklists and announcements, pamphlets and catalogs, all of which are critical primary source documents not only for those working in the visual arts, but also for women's studies scholars. In at least one instance, and I am sure there were many more, a New Jersey women artist active during the WPA and who held many public commissions died. Her surviving sons saw her as their mother, not as a professional artist, and they destroyed all of her papers, thus eliminating any way for future scholars to write about her. As Alice Walker wrote in a book, In Search of Our Mother Gardens, "We are a people do not throw away their geniuses, and if they are thrown away, it is our duty as artists and as witnesses for the future to collect them again for the sake of our children and, if necessary, bone by bone." And I think this is so represented beautifully by Faith Ringgold's Quilting Bee et al., in which she represents significant women in African American women's history. The reputation of women's programs at Rutgers, including the visibility of the nationally recognized Dana Women Artists Series, was a significant factor in attracting numerous women's art organizations and artists to contact us concerning their papers and their collections. Janet Miller, WCA administrator in the 1980s, worked with me to make Rutgers the repository for the WCA papers. Nancy Azara, a founder of the New York Feminist Art Institute, which was established in 1979, contacted us in the 1990s about the archives of that then defunct institution. Their records also included WAR, Women Artists Registry, and the Lucy Lepard collection. And incidentally, Lucy continues to send annually boxes of materials to our archives. In addition to the Mary H. Dana Women Artists Series, files, and as you see in our files, you can find everything from an artist statement by Alice Neal from her 77 exhibit in the Dana Women Artists Series. We also maintain files for contemporary women artists, and we also hold the records of the disbanded Heresies Collective. Emma Amos, who taught at Rutgers and was a member of the collective, recommended that Heresies contact Rutgers libraries when it disbanded. I negotiated the donation of the records to the libraries. In January 2006, the university librarian announced that the Women Artists Archives, which I had established and with which Judy was now involved, would be henceforth named the Miriam Schapiro Archives on Women Artists, to honor that artist for her groundbreaking art, her leadership in the American women's movement in art, and her active support of women artists. She made this announcement at a gala event which Judy and I organized, coinciding with her exhibition, How American Women Artists Invented Postmodernism, 1970 to 75, the inaugural event for the Feminist Art Project. This is especially timely today because when Sylvia Slay spoke at the gala, she mentioned her concern about what artists were going to do with their papers and bodies of work, and Janice will discuss her legacy shortly. As more and more women artists and feminist art activists have come to recognize the importance of documentation for the historical record, they have been in contact with seeking our advice, as well as proposing that their papers join the Schapiro Archives on Women Artists. But most important is the impact of the availability of these archives on the inclusion of women artists in the cultural mainstream. Visual arts, art history, American studies, women's studies, history, and English and other departments often require their students to do research in the Schapiro Archives. Numerous visiting scholars have mined the Schapiro Archives as well. Laura Cunningham delved into the WCA records, leading to her 1998 video, Not for Sale, Feminism and Art in the USA. Hilary Robinson, author of Feminism Art Theory, 1968 to 2000, an anthology, characterized her experiences researching in our collections as, quote, being let loose among the gems of Tiffany's and Cartier's, unquote, and was surprised to find her book project moving in a wholly different direction as a result of her visit there. And this spring, the IWA is sponsoring a Fulbright scholar from the Czech Republic, who's also here in the audience, who's doing a study comparing U.S. feminist art history to what is happening in her country. The Schapiro Archives provided historical context and exhibition materials for the Gloria exhibit in 2002 and WAC Art and the Feminist Revolution, among many museum shows. When the Dean of Douglas was approached in 1987 by the National Association of Women Artists, the oldest U.S. women's art organization founded in 1889, to inquire if the college would accept the donations of its members' art collection, I brokered the transaction among the association, the college, and the Zimmerli Art Museum. This donation of over 200 artworks, exemplified by this self-portrait by Virginia Snedeker, created by NAWA members, has formed the basis of a number of women artists exhibits in the museum, and many of the works have been integrated into its American and modernist galleries. In addition, NAWA has since donated the organization's records to the Schapiro Archives. In 2005, Judy Brodsky and I were awarded a $149,000 grant from the Getty Foundation to develop an online directory of archives containing the papers of women artists active in the U.S. since 1945, which we named WAND, Women Artists Archives National Directory. In addition to individual women artists, both U.S. and foreign-born, WAND leads users to primary source materials about organizations, collectives, publications, and alternative spaces, artist communities, where women visual artists worked or continue to work. WAND's mission also includes encouraging repositories to process the papers of women artists that are often languishing in warehouses and inaccessible. An additional aim of the project is to inspire artists to organize their papers for donation to appropriate research collections, both to benefit researchers and to influence and inspire the next generation of women artists. After receiving more inquiries than we could handle from artists worried about what to do with their bodies of work as well as their papers, the IWA organized a successful conference in 2009 entitled Etched in Memory, Legacy Planning for Artists. The need was such that we sold out our seating capacity 2 weeks before the deadline. All the conference presentations are available for you to look at on our WAND website. You've already heard from Anne about the beginnings of the 2005 initiative that became the Feminist Art Project. I want to add that once Judy Chicago, Anne and their associates learned of the breadth of the activities we were planning at Rutgers, and we were asked to meet, Judy and I did travel to New Mexico to see Judy C. The first thing she asked us was, how did Rutgers get to be such a feminist institution? I think you have a general sense of how that came to be. After a day of discussions about our various plans and a lot of brainstorming, we three hit upon the idea of the Feminist Art Project as a joint enterprise, with Rutgers providing the institutional base and Judy B. and me administering TFAP. Within the same month of the TFAP discussions in that summer of 2005, the Women's Caucus for Art approached us with a request that Rutgers provide a home for its administrative offices. And simultaneously, Joan Marter informed me that she was having informal discussions with Elsa Honig-Fine to ensure that the Woman's Art Journal would not cease publication with its November 2006 issue. She asked for her help to bring it to Rutgers. With so many related opportunities occurring within a matter of weeks, really it was kismet, Judy and I met with Rutgers officials to present our proposal and left with a commitment to fund 4 enterprises. The Art History Department is now the home base for the Women's Art Journal. The WCA Administrative Office is now located within the IWA office building. The Feminist Art Project is a program of the IWA, and the Rutgers University Administration accepted our proposal to fund and create the Institute for Women in Art. The Feminist Art Project extends IWA's mission to a global level, and Anne has already spoken about TFAP at CAA, which I hope many of you will come tomorrow to attend. TFAP is also a clearinghouse for feminist art events. Just visit our website, where the TFAP calendar now lists more than 1,500 events worldwide through 2014. More than 40 TFAP regional coordinators in the U.S. and abroad encourage local meetings, exchange of information, planning of events and activities. TFAP recognizes as well that education is an important component of transforming perceptions and knowledge. Under Connie Tell's capable hands, and with input from our regional coordinators and national committee, she created a series of pages for TFAP website called FAIR, Feminist Art Resources in Education, that includes model curricula that can be freely downloaded and used by K-12 and beyond. With the assistance of Julian Hernandez, who worked at the Museum of Contemporary Art north of Miami, where she developed a wonderful program for adolescent girls at risk called Women on the Rise, she then came to Rutgers for her PhD, and we were able to partner with Wca Miami to publish the curriculum online. It uses feminist artists and pedagogy to help girls develop better self-esteem and awareness. Other educational feminist art programs are also featured on the FAIR webpage and available to school programs and classrooms as feminist art resources. This is not the only component in the IWA educational programming. 2 years ago, Judy and I, in collaboration with the Women and Gender Studies Department, created the first ever online course for the department called Gender, Art, and Society. It was an immediate hit, and the demand is so great that we are obliged to increase the number of course sections each semester. This spring, we added 2 more courses, Homosexuality and Visual Culture, and Gender, Race, and Contemporary Art. We have 270 students enrolled in the 3 courses. Students not based at Rutgers can also enroll. Our eventual goal is to triple the course offerings. We have learned that these online courses act as feeder courses, since many of our students are so engaged by the coursework that they sign up for classroom-based classes in the Art History and Women and Gender Studies departments. We are also ensuring the development of the next generation of feminist visual arts professionals by providing opportunities for students to obtain curatorial, library, and archival experiences that enable them to graduate with practical work experience marketable for the 21st century. In many instances, student assistants have successfully carried out research projects that add gravitas to their CVs. Our work has required entrepreneurship and fundraising, the luck of finding and working with talented pools of individuals, and personal passions. Over the years, Judy and I have been drawn to collaborative work because it takes a group with shared goals and various areas of competence to realize ideas and dreams. The IWA raises visual literacy, works to bring recognition of women artists, educates the public about them, and supports research on art by women. It embodies the Rutgers University motto, Jersey Roots, global reach. Thank you.
Thank you. We're certainly glad for all the things that are happening at Rutgers. It's really amazing. Our next speaker is Susan Fisher Sterling, who's been a longtime curator and now the director of the National Museum of Women in the Arts. And way back when WCA and CAA met in Washington in 1991, and she was just a young curator, she helped us get our Lifetime Achievement Awards at the museum, which I've always appreciated. And in recent years, she's been behind some of having the feminist art exhibitions, the Wca exhibition, the Gorilla Girl exhibition. So she's going to tell us about how the museum has such a significant role in preserving the legacy of women artists by collecting and exhibiting their work and highlighting work by contemporary women. She has also been honored with a WCA President's Award just a few years ago.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see the 100 of you here. And we all on the panel appreciate your support, as well as I want to express my appreciation to the panel itself and to Barbara Wolanin for bringing us all together today. So how many of you remember this May 20th, 2012 Sotheby's sale? Okay. $119.9 million for Edvard Munch's Scream, the quintessential symbol of modern man's angst. When I was speaking earlier this year in Paris, I compared it to Camille Claudel's work from an exhibition that the National Museum of Women in the Arts had when I first became a curator. In fact, when I came to my job the first day, I was asked to come in jeans because I had to unpack the crates. It was one of the most amazing and fulfilling days of my life, being able to take these Claudel works out of their crates and put them on view. And when I think about how many Claudels I could buy with the money that this Edvard Munch went for, it really tears at my heart, but also makes me think very deeply about the role of collecting. When Holland Cotter was discussing this sale in the New York Times, I want to quote him from his article, which is a bit of a long quote, but bear with me. He said, "After studying and writing about art for 40 years, I see too many other options that would allow me to put together an encyclopedic mini-museum for the same dollars. It would begin with early Buddhist art and go on to French illuminated manuscripts, African sculpture, tons of old master paintings and drawings, art that a new generation of collectors fixated on thoroughly branded modern and contemporary art doesn't even know exists. But even if I focused on modern and contemporary art, I know where I'd spend my money. My museum would focus on, for starters, work produced by women internationally over the past 50 years. Together, it would be more than a collection, it would be a force. And given the low interest in and low prices for such art, I could probably pick up most of the work straight from studios and estates, no Sotheby's commissions, thank you, and touch only a fraction of the $120 million museum fund that the Munch would have given me. All I can say when I listen to this quote from Holland Cotter is I have a woman artist's angst about this. This situation is really one of the great pieces in our life that we are really going to have to work hard to overcome. The angst of the modern male artist receiving $119.9 million in a single sale. Next, thank you. And thank you for doing that. The second, I'd like to point out, the second tale I'd like to tell is about Rose Wiley. In July 2012, Wiley was featured in the National Museum of Women in the Arts' ongoing biennial for our national and international committees known as Women to Watch, and the theme of that biennial was figuration, new figuration. There was great coverage in the UK about the exhibition, and our friends group purchased this work for Nimwa's collection. In The Guardian, the headline read, "Who is Britain's hottest new artist?" A 76-year-old called Rose Wiley. The BBC reported, "Everyone in the art world knows Rose Wiley, but nobody knows what to do with her." It was astonishing. I felt like I was back in 1982 when Deborah Y. created the first show at MoMA for Louise Bourgeois. Until the time that NIMWA curator Katie Watt selected Wiley, Rose's greatest worries were her husband's health and the decrepit roof over their head in their cottage in the country, which is where they did all their work. But her next worry was what in the world would happen to her art? Would she have or leave a legacy of any importance? Well, this year, in May 2013, 3 years after her showing at the museum in Washington, and also the UK's committee's purchase, Rose will have her first show, will have a show at the Tate Modern, the rarest of moments. She credits Nimwa with her current success, and as she told us earlier this year, she guesses now she won't have to worry nearly as much about making a living or about her legacy. She's now represented by Thomas Erbin here in New York, and she will have the Tate brand to help her with her market and to secure her legacy. So it's been 25 years since the National Museum of Women in the Arts opened its doors to the public in 1987. At the museum, through our collection, exhibitions, and educational program, and through our very being, we act as a goad or a prod to other arts institutions and to the public as well. Is this the best way to do this? Having taken Linda Naucklin's question about great women artists to heart, we have been part of the efforts to take up the names and works of great women artists and resuscitate their histories. That is our cause. And we exhibit contemporary art by women to help ensure that similar elisions will not be allowed to minimize the creative contributions of women artists in the future. How many of you have been to the museum in Washington? Thank you very much. Your visitorship probably helped pay my salaries along with several of these other people's membership funds. We have the next slide. The museum's founding 25 years ago was a product of one woman's determination and another man's pocketbook. NIMWA's founder, Wilhelmina Cole Holliday, who was 90 years old this past October, at the time spearheaded the museum. At the time of the founding of the museum, she was a very controversial figure, and there were great questions about how a museum of its type, founded on very conservative principles with corporate sponsors and a beautiful marbled great hall, how that was going to be able to embody feminist ideals. But 25 years later, looking at Mrs. Holliday, we can see that she followed the path of other patrician women who founded museums in the United States, whether it was Jane Stanford, Isabella Stewart Gardner, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, or that triumvirate of Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, Mary Quinn Sullivan, and Lily Bliss, who helped Alfred Barr create the Museum of Modern Art. The story of the museum's founding was, as I like to call it, catalyzed by this work by Clara Peters, a 17th century Flemish artist who was unknown to the Hollidays when they saw her work at the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna and also at the Prado. And the founding myth, or actually it's the truth, but the founding idea behind the museum came to the Hollidays upon their return from Europe when they went to look at Janssen's History of Art and found that there were no women artists at all in Janssen's, and this helped to catalyze their collecting habits. The recognition that women were invisible in the history of art inspired their focus, and by the time the museum opened, they had acquired some 500 pieces of European American art representing more than 300 artists over 4 centuries. They also had help, and this is sometimes not recognized, from art historians, feminist art historians such as Eleanor Tufts, Alessandra Comini, and also for a short time, although tumultuous, from Anne Sutherland Harris. At the point in time when the Hollidays had gathered all this work, Mrs. Holliday met Nancy Hanks, the first chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts, and it was actually Hanks who put the idea in Mrs. Holliday's head that there needed to be a museum solely dedicated to women artists. In fact, Nancy Hanks said in her in an oft-repeated story that Mrs. Holliday had actually ruined her life as an arts professional, because every time she went to another museum, she would go seek out where the women artists were, and she would be bitterly disappointed. So with that sort of imprimatur, the Hollidays established the 501c3 of the National Museum of Women in the Arts in 1981, and when the museum opened in 87, the Hollidays had donated their own collection to form the core of the museum. This was a subject, this museum and its collection was a subject of great debate. Everybody, some of you here probably remember the Times article, the Time magazine article by Robert Hughes that lambasted all sorts of vanity museums, but was had a special vitriol for the Women's Museum. But one of the interesting things about great debate is it also provides amazing recognition. And so there was a flip side that really did help to establish the museum as a new entity on the scene. I have the next slide. So here you see the building and also our location in Washington, a couple blocks from the White House. The museum came into existence when feminism, especially in the United States, began what has been called the long walk through institutions. It's the time of women's studies centers, departments. It's the time of rape crisis centers and women's shelters against abuse, women's health initiatives, women's state and local government and other congressional caucuses, and then women's political organizations and lobbies. I know that the museum could have been anywhere, even in New York, but its location in downtown Washington has become increasingly important to us. The original building was a Masonic temple, and then was the in-town theater, which showed porno movies in the daytime and blaxploitation films at night. The Kasser Wing, which was built 10 years after the museum opened, was a porno shop. And so I figure what could be better than to revitalize these spaces with these very male-dominated spaces indeed, with a women's museum. We are the product of the women's movement and feminist art history. And symbolically, if you look at the fact that we're housed in a triangularly shaped building, we are a delta of Venus in the nation's capital that acts like a forward wedge. And as that forward wedge, we really do test the boundaries and help to create a new and freer space for women artists. By standing in the museum, and I know a number of you have felt this way, even though we are separate and apart, when you visit the museum and you see all the artists' works in the galleries on view every day, all day, it makes you question, if you're clever, makes you question every other museum you've ever been to. Where are the other women artists in other museums? Is there some kind of unspoken ratio that is being maintained? Who else is missing even from the museum's collection? And where are those other old mistresses, as we call them, or old masters, in the other museums? The added fact that we're pointed directly at the Treasury Department and the White House holds significance to me. It especially makes me chuckle on one hand and be actually become rather angry or stand on my high horse, because we really are trying to be and continue to work toward being a symbol of equity for women through the example of excellence in the arts. And that is something our great republic has not yet achieved. May I have the next slide? So just to put a fine point on it, our inaugural installation of our New York Avenue sculpture project in 2012 featured the artist Niki de Saint-Phal. It was, in its own way, a subversive gesture, although very few of the critics figured that out. It was a totally tongue-in-cheek thing in some ways. It definitely recognized the role of Saint-Phal, the interest in craft that she had in her sculpture, but it also was 2 blocks from the White House and our answer to all the dead white men on horseback that are the epitome of public sculpture in Washington, D.C. Next. And then our current exhibition of Shakaya Booker's art, since we're really one of the only public spaces in Washington, in the city itself, that shows contemporary art, we now have her sculptures up as an environmental statement in the middle of downtown Washington. Our site, our exterior, the programming that goes on inside the museum and emanates out from our network of national and international committees, and also through our web and social media initiatives, these all qualify us as that special kind of locus of activities on behalf of women in the arts now and obviously, thank God, into the future. We have a broad mandate. We recognize that, and we also recognize that it's a heavy mantle, because an artist's acceptance into a museum collection, a display in a solo or group show, documentation in a catalog, inclusion in a museum archives or research center are among the best ways that a women artist legacy can be recognized and survive. Witness Rose Wiley, who I talked to about earlier. And so we feel that obligation. So what now? What's next for the museum as we head out of our 25th anniversary? Well, I go back to Barbara's comments early in the session. The stats here don't lie, as much as I would like them to be different. As we look at the Guerrilla Girls broadside that they created for the Women's Museum's 20th anniversary and read the statistics that we've compiled from key sources, including here in the U.S., including the College Art Association, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Women's Caucus for Art, and the Guerrilla Girls, there still is a long way to go. We all know there is some progress. The Museum of Modern Art, with their Women's Initiative, has moved up from 5% to 7% women in their galleries. The Sackler Center for Feminist Art is truly beginning to impact collection demographics at the Brooklyn Museum. You've heard from Ferris Olin how much Rutgers has done through the Dayner Arts program and also through their larger commitment, the biggest commitment I can think of any place in the United States toward women artists and their legacies. And then we also have such things as Linda Lee Alter, the collector in Philadelphia, giving her work to the Philadelphia Academy of Fine Arts. And although we were in the running for that collection as well, I'm actually very happy that it stayed in its hometown, because it has an influence there that, again, becomes an important game changer for that organization. There also is a growing network of women curators and directors who are paying attention to the feminist principles that the National Museum of Women in the Arts was founded upon, whether it's Iwona Blaswick at the Whitechapel Art Gallery or Camille Morino at the Pompidou Center, who created the exhibition L, and there are many, many more. We also see the phenomenon of women collecting women, or collectors owning large caches of women's work. Valeria Napoleone in the UK, Anita Zabludovich, Barbara Lee, and Heather and Tony Podesta, who provide many works for our contemporary collection. And although we are not totally secure for the future, women artists who have achieved the markers such as museum and marketplace recognition can be said to have a legacy status that was not afforded in previous generations, although they are still very, very few in number. So at the museum, whether it's cause or taste, we take what some would see as an institutional disadvantage, meaning only women, although once in a while I do show men as comparative material, which is what my graduate professor Sam Hunter told me women were when I was taking courses at Princeton. So we use that idea that we are only women institutionally to see art anew. To be very honest, when I first started working at the museum as a junior curator, actually that was about the time I think we took the WCA Awards event, I really anticipated that in 10 years we would have achieved equity for women in the arts and that the National Museum of Women in the Arts would be folded into the Smithsonian. That was sort of my little dream. But now, as the museum finishes its 25th year, and given the statistics, which are still very tough, I believe that I have job security for at least the next 25 years. I actually feel that this is a 100-year project, whereas I truly was naive when I was much younger in thinking that it would be 10. But I also imagine something quite different for the National Museum of Women in the Arts regarding legacies than I did when I was younger. Have the next. As we were working on this exhibition called Trove, I think it really came home to us that we understand that the future of the museum resides in the contemporary artists we collect, since this is the era in which women artists have truly come into their own. We will always honor the old mistresses in our galleries, but this is where we'll really be able to make our mark. We also know that by looking at a body of work that is solely by women, we can segment it in ways that generate new correspondences and convergences. In its very being, the art in the museum's collection can reify or put the lie to traditional positions in art history, but most importantly, we're able to build new understandings that will help define the art of our days and the important practitioners for future generations. We can amplify on thematic ways of seeing, as NIMWA's curators did in the recent 25th anniversary collection exhibition called Trove. It was a complement to our chronological displays of women artists' achievements throughout the rest of the museum, and it was an exhibition developed by a team that included our curator, our educator, our head of marketing, and also one of our development younger people, because it was interesting to all of them to be able to try and work together. Next. Thank you. We have, over the past number of years, collected over 4,000 works rather than from the early donation of 500. And so we have a great cache of feminist art from the 70s and 80s, as well as other works that have been from that era that continue to be, that are a central part of our galleries. You have first-generation people such as Judy Chicago, Linda Benglis and Peter Coyne in the 80s, and then Kathy DeMoncho. You can see her work down the piece called Red at the bottom. That's your right. And then someone like Charlotte Gillenhammer falling through her wedding gown in what is both a photo and a video installation that we have occasionally in our galleries. The idea of central core imagery and ideas of women's work like sewing, as well as images of what girls are made of. The socially determined sugar and spice and everything nice continues to be, the critique of that continues to be part of our days and takes on new critical meanings with each successive generation. Next. The legacies we have in terms of building connections or creating correspondences also has to do with identities and changing standards of beauty. You'll recognize a number of the artists in this group, from Ingrid Mwangi to Isabelle Rossell. Next. And then as well with postmodern or contemporary photography, whether it quotes art history, as in the work by Justine Kurland on your left. These sorts of correspondences or convergences are something we're able to develop as the collection has grown. We'll take next. So the best networking device, though, that we really have for the access to legacy is really, in terms of first imprint, is our new website and our collection's highlights. I never thought I would be saying this, but the museum has become something of a pilgrimage place, whereas it's the website that truly is the first place that people come to see us. And so in our 25th anniversary year, we knew we needed to create a website that was dynamic enough to not only give people a sense of the museum, but also entice people to come and see the real thing. And if we're lucky enough to receive an IMLS grant, Institute of Museum and Library Services grant this year, we will be able to create a new collections database that allows us to pull so much more of our records into the public space of our website. We add about 50 works at a time right now. The real challenge that we find, and I think all of the speakers would agree with me on this, it's having the bodies to do the work, because the work is there and we know what we need to do. But as of this spring, we will have only 150 works of our 400 work collection on view. So being able to make sure that there's a way that we can not just continue, but actually keep up is a key factor in being able to help create the legacies for women artists. The nice thing about the grant for our collections database is that if we are able to receive it, it will tie into a new Art by Women resource that we're developing for the museum. That resource will replace our database of 14,000 artists called Clara with a new form of profiling, or that's a word that maybe I shouldn't use, a new form of profiles of women artists that we will actually create, allow artists to create, many of you to create in a user-friendly format. It will enable us to keep up the archives by having you help us keep that up. And we also will be working to ensure that our digital present doesn't get lost in the future by including the works of conceptual and new media artists. Next. So, in tandem with the collection's growth, the possibilities for exhibitions and documentations through partnerships with the museum is more plentiful than ever. There was a time when I used to say my queendom for just another work of art to be able to complete this gallery, or can't I find someone who wants to do a show on women artists that I could take for my institution? Because we are a curatorial staff of 3, and it's very, very difficult to generate all the artists' exhibitions that we might like on our own. So Washington has become an extremely important place to us because through embassy contacts in particular, we've been able to create exhibitions, whether it's from the women artists from the Hermitage, the Louvre, Versailles, or our current exhibition of Anna Anker, Denmark's greatest woman artist of the 19th century and a national treasure. That show, which we created with help from the Embassy of Denmark is on view now. And that is really something I never anticipated, but Washington provides, which other venues might not have helped us with. The ability to bring outstanding, under-recognized artists from across the globe to U.S. audiences through the museum. Next. And then nothing is more successful, as we've heard from Ferris, than the drumbeat of continuing exhibitions of contemporary artists. And our Women to Watch series, this year it was called Women to Watch High Fiber, and any woman over 50 would get that one. The museum is able to promote women who are active in a variety of creative communities, from large urban centers such as London to rural enclaves such as Northwest Arkansas, now the home of the new Crystal Bridges, where the museum has committees. And we have committees in over 17 states and 7 countries abroad. And those committees do grassroots advocacy on behalf of women artists, and they also work with curators in their region to bring women artists' works together in our Women to Watch series. These exhibitions have all the trimmings, whether it's digital files, audio files of women talking about their work, brochures, or other archival materials that allows us to learn and actually promote artists from across our region and across the world. And our web-based initiatives in this regard are still in its infancy, but we can see moving that Women to Watch project onto the website to have it be a continual program and to have the possibility even for outside our curators to create things just for the website. One more. So the promise of being an ongoing advocate for equity for women through excellence in the arts is a new part of our website, which again has is becoming more important to us. The advocate section is a development on our to-do list. Our legacy of agitation propaganda with facts and figures is important, and it really does marshal to the cause that we were founded on. Next. Currently, we have a grassroots census of women artists in museums and galleries. There's already a link on the advocacy page, or when you go to the advocacy section for online challenges. And we will be launching new participatory opportunities in March 2013 as part of Women's History Month to be able to find out more about what is really happening out there. As much as I always hated statistics, the stats can be used in very important ways. And then related to that, the museum's Library and Research Center is collaborating with the Archives of American Art on a Wikipedia-thon this March, so stay tuned for that. This effort will encourage scholars and artists, students and devotees of women artists to edit, create, and extend entries on women artists using materials provided by both the archives and the Women's Museum. This is a first step toward a much larger yearly and potential ongoing project. And then I'd like to end with this shot of our homepage currently, which has an DC artist Freya Grand's work on it, with the mountain to climb. There's always that next mountain to climb. Because in a very real sense, 25 years at the National Museum of Women in the Arts means that we are just getting started. As an institution that thankfully has a compelling mission that differentiates us and a secure future with a $50 million endowment, key feature, over the next 25 years we will continue to change and grow in order to ensure that the legacy of women artists survives, provide readings and contexts that make women's artistic efforts accessible and meaningful to diverse publics, and finally, to engage audiences globally in our and others' ongoing efforts to recognize and promote equity for women through the example of excellence in the arts. Thank you.
Thank you. Lots of things to look online here. We have two more speakers. Joan Marter, who is the Board of Governors Professor of Art History at Rutgers University, has inspired many students to focus their energies on women artists, and she's also one of our WCA Lifetime Achievement Awardees. She will share her experience of creating and managing a foundation for a woman sculptor and her experience as a contributor to and editor of the Woman's Art Journal. And she's also going to tell us about an artist retreat that she's working on.
Thank you to Barbara for organizing this panel, and thank you for the other speakers, and thank you for your attention, and as Rachel Maddow would say, thank you for staying with us. Nope. Okay. So I'm addressing my remarks, I would have to say, primarily to the women artists in the audience and those who care about those women artists. And I have in the front there some brochures about Soaring Gardens that I will be speaking about in my presentation. This is an artist residency, which is part of the legacy of Ora Lerman, who was a past president of the Women's Caucus New York chapter and a friend of mine for a number of years. And I will also be very eager and willing to answer questions if any of you have questions about foundations and trusts that I can try to answer at the end. So women artists produce their work with great passion for decades, but how many of them can count on having their art documented, preserved, and written about after their productive years have ended? Managing women's artists' legacies has been the goal in my engagement in several different projects, and one of these projects is my editorship of the Woman's Art Journal, which has now been published continuously for 33 years. This is, I believe, the only publication of feminist art in this country that has survived for 33 years. Another project is my position as president of the Dorothy Dayner Foundation for the Visual Arts, after serving as executor of the Dorothy Dayner estate. In addition, I am a trustee of the Ora Lerman Trust, which manages an artist residency, which is entitled Soaring Gardens. The Woman's Art Journal has a very long history going back to 1980, when Joan Semmel wrote about sexual imagery in women's art in the first issue. The journal was founded by Elsa Honig-Fine, who was editor and publisher until 2005. And then in 2006, the editorial direction of the journal was taken over by myself and Margaret Barlow, the previous associate editor, with now Dr. Uta Tellini, who is with us today as book review editor, and also Old City Publishing in Philadelphia, that has become the publisher and the locus, I guess you would say, for the subscriptions. And actually, Old City Publishing is the publisher of many scholarly journals, including the Woman's Review of Books, which is based at Wellesley, and that has a huge circulation. Rutgers University assumes sponsorship of the editorial side, including both the selection of articles and the assignment of the book reviews, which is to say the responsibility of the editors, including the book review editor. The unique purpose and scope of the Woman's Art Journal and its standards of scholarship have been noted during its long history. The goal of the Woman's Art Journal has been to celebrate the achievement of women artists. We try to balance the selection of articles to include art historical subjects as well as contemporary women. Generally, we publish a range of topics from the ancient world, medieval, to modern subjects, reflecting the submissions we receive. For example, we had new research on Lavinia Fontana and Artemisia Gentileschi from the eminent art historian Anne Sutherland Harris, to articles on 19th century artists such as Mary Cassatt and Violet Oakley, and then diverse 20th century artists, including Italian futurist Benedetta Cappa-Marinetti, and contemporary Japanese artists such as this, Americo Mori. We also have special issues. For example, this is one that was devoted to Lee Krasner. That was a result actually of a symposium that took place at Stony Brook. And all of the articles in this issue were devoted to Lee Krasner and her work. And we do a lot with color. We have, of course, the cover, but we also have quite a number of pages at the beginning of the journal and the end of color plates. We also did another issue devoted to Paula Modersohn Becker, and that originated actually as a session at CAA, and then certain papers were chosen from that session to be published together. But in fact, it's kind of difficult to devote a whole issue to one artist because the journal only comes out twice a year, and we have really quite a number of submissions. We're really amazingly getting submissions at this point from all over the world. In fact, we have subscribers also worldwide. And I guess you'd say our submissions reflect that global reach. So, for example, Europe, Asia, and even the Middle East. In 2012, for example, we had an issue featuring 2 Iranian artists. The cover here on the octogenarian Monir Shahrudi Farmafarian, whose magnificent constructions in glass can be seen in New York, and a contemporary feminist also in that issue, Mandana Magadam, who actually an article came to us unsolicited by a lecturer in art history at the Shiraz Institute of High Education in Iran. The current issue has an essay on Samia Berksoy, sort of discussed with Tracy Eamon, by Gulsum Baydar, a distinguished professor in Turkey, again, which came to us unsolicited. Our authors and book reviews represent many universities in the United States and some on other continents, and then we also have young scholars and distinguished professors, both male and female, who write for us. And I will say also that the process is that we do have our articles sent out for review by scholars, and we do have an editorial board that helps us with that. This is basically a 3-person operation. We don't have any help other than the 3 people who are involved, myself, Margaret Barlow, and Uta Tellini. We run the journal in the sense that we send out everything. Everything is done pretty much online at this point, and that is it. We have no interns. The Woman's Art Journal continues to provide a fitting legacy for American women artists, particularly a selected few who have experienced limited opportunities for such recognition. So the journal, for example, has published studies of Minna Citron, Mercedes Matter, among others, and artists who have not had much attention in art historical literature are given substantive acknowledgement in the pages of the journal, along with excellent illustrations of their work. Thorough research is combined with color illustrations, and in recent years, many images have been included with the text. And I will say, because of the use of digital imagery and the expertise of our designer, we've had many more black and white images that we're able to publish in the journal than ever before. And the editors inform our authors to emphasize the achievements of women artists rather than focusing on neglect or the failure to find recognition. Our articles chronicle lives and works and focus on singular accomplishments of the women artists celebrated in these pages. Although we cannot possibly review every new book that is published in the field, our book review editor, Uta Tellini, assures that substantive reviews are written on a full range of titles, including monographs and major exhibition catalogs. I will say, however, we do not review exhibitions. We review exhibition catalogs. And we are fortunate to have among our reviewers distinguished professors and art critics, as well as young scholars. So the Women's Art Journal has been recognized for its intelligent and thorough review of books on women artists. we do review important publications that appear as exhibition catalogs. For example, the Yayoi Kusama exhibition catalog that was a show that was held recently in this country and was shown at the Whitney Museum was reviewed along with an autobiography by the artist. And I will say also that the journal is now indexed and available online 3 years after publication through JSTOR. And also EBSCO has taken on the journal so that 1 year after publication, the journal is available through that service. And of course, subscriptions are available here at the CAA conference. There are discounts for CAA members and the Women's Caucus for Art. We have a booth in the hall. So editorship of the Women's Art Journal is one of my projects related to the legacy of women artists. And then since 1995, I have managed the Dorothy Dayner Foundation with the responsibility of placing this modernist sculptor's work in public collections. For 14 years, I have served as a trustee also of the Aura Lerman Trust and a juror for the Soaring Gardens, and that's Lerman's country estate, which is now an artist summer residence for painters, sculptors, writers, and musicians, and they are selected annually. This is Dorothy Dayner, probably about 91 in this photograph. She died in 1994. She was the wife of David Smith from 1925 to 1952, and it was identified with the abstract expressionist generation. Dayner began creating sculpture in 1955, 3 years after her divorce from Smith. And here they are together in the 1940s. You can go on to the next one. Yeah. As the executor of her estate, I organized an inventory of her studio. This is an earlier view of her studio. Looks a little different now because, gradually the work is going off into collections. But this is sort of at the beginning. And her work includes drawings, paintings, sculpture, and prints. And I initially, and of course everybody that goes through this process knows that the first thing you do is work with an appraiser to establish the values for tax purposes. So I sat with the appraiser for days on end, showing the appraiser every single work of art, every drawing in the files, every print, in order that the appraisal could be made. And then, as a result, we did an inventory, which I have as a database now that I still, of course, use after 14 years. There was also the task of recovering artworks, very complicated, that were assigned or were on consignment to various galleries, and I had to find them and I had to, recover them. As I say, there is a database, and I would suggest going to the Joan Mitchell Foundation now that is making available to artists a software package that is useful for setting up an inventory for an artist. In her will, Dayner had given directions for the formation of a nonprofit foundation. And through the law firm that handled her estate, the Dayner Foundation was established within 1 year of her death. In Dayner's case, she was advised by that law firm, and I was not directly involved in the decision to form a foundation. People now who are seeking information on establishing a nonprofit foundation can refer to something called the Visual Artist's Guide to Estate Planning, which is published by the Marie Walsh Sharp Art Foundation. And that is available with contributions by Barbara Hoffman. You can Google Barbara Hoffman, Hoffman, who's a lawyer, and she's one of the writers and others. This book is now available online. So if you look up Barbara Hoffman, you'll look for A Visual Artist's Guide to Estate Planning under her name. As president of the Dayner Foundation, my responsibilities include arranging for a commercial art gallery to sell works. The sale of works, of course, is necessary to pay rent on the studio of the artist and to finance the repair of artworks, matting, and framing for exhibitions. I am constantly seeking opportunities for the exhibition of Dayner's art. I have the responsibility of distributing artworks from the estate. By law, a nonprofit foundation must distribute a portion of its assets each year. Fortunately, many museums have been interested in the works of Dorothy Dayner, and therefore made the painstaking process of distributing, or that is to say donating, drawings, sculptures, and prints easier for me. From the original studio, the dealer, and the dealer now is Crashar Galleries, has been selling works, and I donate others to museums. For the large sculpture in the studio, a gift purchase arrangement is initiated. The museum, in this case, pays a portion of the market value of the sculpture, and the remaining cost is considered a gift from the Dorothy Dayner Foundation. I think this is also, obviously, can be done for any artwork of value. It's a very good arrangement. The advantages of having an advocate for a woman artist estate include opportunities for special recognition. For example, Dorothy Dayner has been included in several group exhibitions that I helped to organize. When the Museum of Modern Art, including, by the way, a show called Women in Abstract Expressionism, when the Museum of Modern Art was planning an exhibition of their collection of abstract expressionist works in 2010, and by the way, that was supposed to be an exhibition of their collection, the curators were eager to include Dorothy Dayner. In other words, they wanted Dorothy Dayner for their collection very quickly. As a result, 3 curators from the museum visited the artist's studio, and I arranged the donation of a number of prints and 2 drawings, which were subsequently framed very quickly and installed in the exhibition of abstract expressionist works on paper that was shown on the 2nd floor of the museum. And then the museum had purchased Encounter, which is a very large, one of her most important bronzes, and this was purchased through the art dealer and was included also in the show. And I should mention that Dorothy's work was shown in a gallery adjacent to the work of David Smith, and it was shown very beautifully, in fact. I search also for other opportunities for the recognition of Dorothy Dayner, and I've been delighted to see her work at the National Gallery of Art, and collections of her work can be found, of course, at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Cleveland Museum of Art, which also gave Dayner a retrospective exhibition shortly after her death. And also there's a very beautiful work, not this one, but a very beautiful work at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. And this one is at the DeCordova Museum. It's a sculpture garden in Lincoln, Massachusetts. And this is an example of the model of the gift purchase. In this case, the museum applied to the Rothschild Foundation, which was at that time giving grants. And they were able to get a grant for $20-some thousand, which they gave to the foundation. And in return, this work was gifted to the museum. This is this is her largest sculpture. It's 20 feet high, and it's still very beautifully installed in the sculpture garden at the DeCordova Museum. A current show entitled Dorothy Dayner at the Hyde is on view at the Hyde Collection in Glens Falls, New York, located near Bolton Landing, where Dorothy and David Smith lived from the 1930s to the 1950s. In the future, I hope that curators from museums and university galleries will come to the Dayner studio to select works from the collection, and I continue to work with art historians and critics who write about Dayner and Smith. And I just wanted to mention some of them. Esther Tyson, for example, who wrote her dissertation at Yale on Dorothy Dayner's sculpture. Paula Wazotsky, who published several articles on Dayner and Smith. And art critic Michael Brenson, who's in the process of writing a biography of David Smith. And he spent several afternoons with me in the Dayner studio examining her drawings and taking notes of some of the books that I have from the Dayner library. The project of ensuring legacy for women artists is multifaceted, and as a result of my efforts and that of other art historians, Dayner has been included in articles, essays, and exhibitions. And I want to mention Ellen Landau's comprehensive anthology, Abstract Expressionism, Context and Critique, from 2005. And in that I wrote an essay called Arcadian Nightmares, the Evolution of David Smith and Dorothy Dayner's Work at Bolton Landing. And that was supposed to be a feminist approach to writing about abstract expressionism. And my work on this is going to continue, obviously, for many years to come. I still have a studio full of work, and I hope to distribute all or sell the artworks in the artist's studio. Obviously, you don't put things on the market all at one time. This work with the foundation can involve hours. It can involve days, depending on the requests that come to me for access to the studio, and queries for specific information about her art. Okay, then there's the Ora Lerman Trust. Painter Ora Lerman, who I mentioned was the president of the New York chapter of the Women's Caucus, and I met her when I first moved to New York in 1977. She died in 1998 at the age of 60. She is honored in a different way, and I'm one of the trustees of the Ora Lerman Trust, and I serve on a jury to select artists for Soaring Gardens, the site of a residency program for working artists founded in 1999. Ora Lerman is known for her paintings of figures. This is a catalog that the Dorothy Dayner, the Ora Lerman Trust organized, and this is one of her paintings. Her work features a rich and colorful palette, and she explores the surrounding world with narrative tableaus. Lerman also had a great interest in nature, and she spent her summers at a country house located on the rolling hills of northeastern Pennsylvania. Inspired by Monet's gardens at Giverny, which Lerman visited in 1988, she named her property Soaring Gardens. It has been more than 10 years since Soaring Gardens became a residency for working artists that provides studio space and a 20-acre natural setting. Ora Lerman did not have commercial gallery representation, although she had commissions from the New York City Department of Education. She was shown in many group exhibitions. She had a solo show as part of the Women Artists Series at Douglas College. And the trustees have been able to arrange several exhibitions of Ora Lerman's paintings. A major exhibition was organized at Manhattan's Hebrew Union College in 2001. This is the catalog, actually, for that show. And it traveled to the University of Scranton and the University of Pittsburgh. And our paintings, by the way, are now in storage. Only a couple of these works are displayed at Soaring Gardens. The next one. Okay. So the house and studio at Soaring Gardens represent the primary legacy of Ora Lerman. And they've now had a 10-year retrospective of artists who have been part of the residency program. This exhibition is called Soaring Gardens Artist Retreat, the first 10 years, and it's on view at the Hope Horn Gallery at the University of Scranton. It's actually going on right now until March 15th. Here you're seeing a view of her studio, beautiful studio, and the gardens, a little bit of the gardens. There's also a nearby church, which is converted into a studio and living quarters, and these have become popular summer retreats for artists, composers, and writers. Typically, artists apply as a group, and that's a very interesting thing to know. So you're not really applying as an individual, although each individual artist is reviewed. But typically, people want to come as a group. They are expected to cook their own meals. At least somebody has to drive because this is a fairly remote place. But this is a really great opportunity for artists that are in an urban area and want to be out in the country in the summertime. The residencies usually last about a month. And the jury reviews the works in late March for the subsequent summer months. And as I say, I have information here. These brochures about Soaring Gardens. There's also a website, www.lermantrust.org. So my experiences in building a legacy for women artists have been very rewarding. Legacies for women artists have involved securing artworks from museum and university collections, publicizing works by women artists through articles in museum catalogs, and seeking new and creative ways to attain recognition for remarkable women artists. And I also want to mention, because I am aware here at CAA, that I have been the advisor for about 20 dissertations at Rutgers University devoted to the subject of women artists and various feminist topics. And I hope that my students are going to go out there and are going to bring their knowledge of women artists and feminism to whatever their jobs are. Many of them have gone into curatorial work, but those who are going into teaching, I hope, are teaching courses on women artists too. So thank you.
Okay, one more wonderful talk. Please stay with us. Janice Nesserchu is the immediate past president, still very active on the board of the Women's Caucus for Art. She's also the chair of the Art and Humanities Department and professor of art at St. Louis Community College, Florissant Valley, and she's going to focus on the Women's Caucus for Art, its legacy of, and the current Sylvia Slee Legacy Initiative, and the transformative power of bequests for an organization. And she'll explain about how making bequests of money, art, or their papers, women artists and art historians can help nourish and inspire future generations.
First of all, I'd like to thank you all for staying so late. You've been sitting here for 2 hours. I know many of you are probably hungry, and we're getting close to dinner time. But I think legacy has always been something that is so dear and important to me and to my heart. As a young college student in the 80s, I only knew about a handful of women artists. And when I would ask about women artists, I was always told, well, there are no great women artists. And what I try to imbue to my students these days is that there's so much to learn and so much that's not in the books, that there are other places to go and look for the information. And I think today is a great example of information that isn't always in your history books or taught in your art classes. I took a group of students to San Francisco 6 years ago, and we went to the Museum of Modern Art, and they had a retrospect of their collection. And I guess I was a little bit encouraged when a male student came up to me and said, Janice, where are the women artists? And why is the only woman artist Louise Bourgeois? And why is she in the back of the room? So, I mean, I think that for some people we may think that legacy is not a main topic for women and women's activism, but it really is. So I'm going to begin my talk. You have to excuse me because I have to push my own buttons. Okay. No, I'll do it. I'm fine. For over 40 years, the Women's Caucus for Art has been instrumental in advocating for women in the arts and women artists. WCA has been in the business of not just building legacy, and I do mean it's a business, but ensuring that women artists are acknowledged, exhibited, written about, and included. The vehicles for delivering legacy have taken on many forms, from exhibitions to publications to conferences, developing chapters to mentoring young women in the arts, and to the Lifetime Achievement Awards. And today, the Sylvia Slee Legacy Initiative. For over 40 years, the Women's Caucus for Art has had as its only focus building a legacy for women in the arts. But what is legacy? The simplest definition, a thing handed down by a predecessor. So it is something handed down, but yet it is so much more. When we talk about building a legacy for women artists, we are talking about moving women artists out of the shadows and into the light, about not only writing down our words, but making sure that others hear them, about documenting and making sure that future generations know not only the big events and the big names, but the small moments and the quieter voices as well. There are moments that change the trajectory of history and impact everything that they touch. For over 40 years, the Women's Caucus for Art has created a legacy for women in the arts. It was born in 1972 when a group of women met at the annual College Art Association conference in San Francisco in an overflowing room to discuss sex discrimination in art departments. And in those moments of coming together, there was a knowing that this was something more. They understood that they needed to be represented, to be heard, not just for themselves, but for the future generation of all women and women artists. This is legacy. They immediately collected money to start an organization, and the new Women's Caucus of the College Art Association came into existence. In 1974, the College Art Association informed the Women's Caucus that they could no longer use the CAA name. And at that moment, the Women's Caucus for Art moved from being a committee of CAA to becoming an independent organization, able to set its own goals and create its own vision, legacy. In 1977, WCA held its first national conference and the first national exhibition in Los Angeles in conjunction with the College Art Association. In 1979, the Lifetime Achievement Awards were established. They were the first awards to recognize the contributions of women in the arts and their profound effect on the larger society. Legacy. President and Mrs. Jimmy Carter presented the first honors awards for the Lifetime Achievement for Women in the Visual Arts at the White House to George O'Keeffe in absentia, Louise Nevelson, Alice Neal, Selma Burke, and Isabel Bishop. The women artists honored at the first ceremony were the first in a distinguished roster of outstanding artists, art historians, curators, educators, critics, museum and gallery professionals, and other visionaries who WCA continues to honor today. The awards honored their work, their vision, their commitment, and their sheer determination. But not only were their stories and accomplishments celebrated, their work was also documented in an exhibition and a catalog. Legacy, the idea of something being handed down. The importance was not only in honoring them, but also in writing it down, in documenting it. These were the defining moments that propelled a shared vision into an organization, which over 40 years later is on the forefront of representing women in the arts, expressing their concerns, validating their voices, and most importantly, honoring their legacy. In my last few years on the national board, I have seen WCA as an organization come full circle and once again become a defining and a driving force for women in the arts. While the Lifetime Achievement Awards are often the most focused on aspect of the Women's Caucus for Arts work to build legacy, WCA's legacy work is multifaceted and varied. Every year, WCA produces a Lifetime Achievement Award catalog that not only includes the bio of the awardees, but also essays on the awardees written by art historians. In 2012, to celebrate the 40th anniversary of WCA, WCA produced a special anniversary issue of the Lifetime Achievement Award catalog that included essays by Mary Garrard, Barbara Wolanin, and a collection of reflections by past award recipients and WCA presidents. I will also say one of the most important things WCA did in the last 6 years was to start to realize that if we write these down, but these works are not in museums and in libraries, nobody's going to see these words. And so it was really when we started to institute that every catalog we put out now follows Library of Congress and has an ISBN number. It becomes very important. This year, actually, the WCA honored 4 women and 1 President's Award for Art and Activism, and this actually happened last night. Tina Dunkley, Artist Lane, Joan Semmel, Susanna Laval, and the President's Awardee for Art and Activism, Leon Stella. Throughout WCA's history, it has encouraged the exhibition and facilitated exhibition of work by women artists. Often to the point, though, that many started to identify WCA as an organization only concerned with putting on exhibitions and not concerned with the true work of legacy, which was documenting, writing, and publishing. In the last few years, WCA has initiated cutting-edge exhibitions, and while promotion and exhibition of women's work is a vital part of WCA and serves to educate the public on the depth and breadth of women's work, WCA acknowledges that exhibitions alone are not enough, that these exhibitions must be documented, they must be written about, they must be analyzed, and they must be critiqued. WCA's groundbreaking exhibition, Man as Object, Reversing the Gaze, took place at Soma Arts in San Francisco during the fall of 2011. It traveled to the Kinsey Institute Museum in the spring of 2012. The exhibition showcased the work of established women artists, Carolee Schneeman, Orlan, Lynn Hirschman, the Guerrilla Girls, and the late Sylvia Slay, alongside a curated national exhibition of women artists. The exhibition was a vehicle for showcasing work by women, but more important than that, it was a historical survey and investigated how women looked at men. WCA produced a full-color publication that included the work in the exhibition, but went a step further. The publication included thought-provoking and analytical articles written by Lynn Hirschman, Annie Sprinkle, and more, as well as historical context and analysis by the curator and art historian Tanya Osberg, PhD. The closing reception in San Francisco even included a panel looking at men then and now with artists Carolee Schneeman, Annie Sprinkle, Melissa Wolf, and Tanya Osberg. A video of the panel was produced. Again, anytime we as women give a talk, have a presentation, have a workshop, it's very important to be documenting this. The documentation is the key for us to build legacy. In the spring of 2011, WCA developed an initiative in order to bring together and focus on various aspects of building legacy. WCA set up a series of goals to give context to the work they were already doing on legacy, to look at other needs or other avenues to build legacy, and to set up a funding source for that initiative. And from that was born the Sylvia Slay Legacy Campaign and Initiative. The initiative facilitates donations and raises funds to ensure that women's work will be exhibited, cataloged, collected, written about, and preserved in museums and institutions throughout the country. I think the important thing about this, too, is that WCA is a volunteer organization. We collect membership dues. We barely survive off membership dues. But I think what we started to really realize is that the importance of our work really was legacy, and how we can start to think about funding legacy and how we can start to think about funding legacy projects. The Legacy Initiative has 6 goals: to educate women on the importance of their legacy in cataloging and archiving their work and their papers, to facilitate the placement of women's art in museums and permanent collections, to publish articles, essays, and catalogs on women artists, to continue to cultivate and grow WCA's current programs on legacy, to partner and support other organizations that are working towards the same goals and mission of WCA. And in order to do that, to procure funding to meet these goals through the development of WCA programs on fiscal receivership, fiscal sponsorship, and planned giving. This important initiative was made possible by the generous donations of the estate of the late Sylvia S. Alloway, Sylvia Slay, an artist and lifelong advocate for women in the arts. She was selected to receive the Lifetime Achievement Award in 2011, but sadly passed away in the fall of 2010 and wasn't able to receive the award. I think, one of a story that I was actually told is that months and months before, she was already so excited and already writing her acceptance speech because she was so excited that somebody was really recognizing her and recognizing her work. In my last year as president of the WCA, I have worked closely with the estate of Sylvia Slay and their executors, Douglas John and Paula Ewan, to begin to develop and facilitate the Sylvia Slay Legacy Campaign and Initiative. The estate has made several donations of artwork in order to support the initiative. The first donation to WCA was Sylvia Slay's piece, Turkish Bath. The funding from the sale of this piece became the foundation for the initiative and the impetus to encourage others to follow in her footsteps. In partnering with the WCA, Slay's estate will ensure that her work continues and that women's work is exhibited and written into history. In the last year, WCA has developed policies on fiscal receivership and fiscal sponsorship. WCA has worked with the Slay estate to develop a strategy for planned giving in order to begin to meet the first 5 goals of the initiative. WCA is currently also working towards instituting a national campaign to encourage planned giving. Planned giving is one of the ways we can ensure that women's art is documented, cataloged, and collected. It can ensure that art and the cultural legacy of women in the arts thrives for generations to come. Very simply put, planned giving, sometimes called gift planning, is a method of supporting nonprofits that enables philanthropic individuals or donors to make much larger donations than they could make from their own income. While some planned gifts provide a lifelong income to the donor, others use estate and tax planning techniques that maximize the gift or minimize its impact actually on the donor's estate. Planned giving can be open-ended or very focused. Funds can be earmarked with special projects, such as publications on women's artists, exhibitions featuring the work of specific women artists or general exhibitions, or even workshops for women artists focusing on the tools to ensure legacy. We've just actually had a major donor in St. Louis who wants us to start to work on a history of women artists in St. Louis and has made kind of a large, actually, donation to begin to work on a publication. In November 2011, WCA initiated the donation of Sylvia Slay's piece, Lawrence and Susan Delgado, and Interior to the permanent collection of Mills College, an all-women's college located in Oakland, California. The piece will now be on view to be appreciated and studied by the next generation of women artists and art historians who walk through their doors. But building legacy is not a singular occupation or the domain of WCA alone. To borrow Hillary's words, and actually Ferris's earlier, it takes a village. So it's important that this initiative will allow WCA to be more philanthropic and aid others in making sure that women's art is recognized and valued. Donations from the Slay estate has given WCA the opportunity to help support other nonprofits focusing on women in the arts, as well as to build a foundation for future initiatives. In January 2012, the donation of Kim Harden-Niku, The Divine Woman, 1984, allowed WCA to support the work of both Soho 20 Gallery in New York and Masterpieces, a lecture series by Dr. Janet Rebold Benton. And in February 2012, the donation of Christine, 1969, allowed WCA to support the Arts for Children's program administered by the Claremont Rotary in Claremont, California, which is in eastern Los Angeles. In April 2012, the donation of Demonstration Model at the New School, North Dakota, helped WCA sponsor the Sylvia Slay Legacy Campaign Tour. And in November 2012, the donation of Self-Portrait with Lipstick and Untitled Still Life will help WCA support AIR Gallery here in New York and actually support the Lifetime Achievement Awards and build a larger foundation for the Initiative Fund. In the summer of 2011, the Legacy Initiative began to work with the state of Sylvia Slay on the possibility of an American and European tour of Sylvia's work. The WCA has been instrumental in serving as an advisor and a supporter of the tour, and WCA is a sponsor of this tour. The tour is the most comprehensive retrospect to date of Sylvia Slay's work, 1916 to 2010. It consists of works spanning more than 60 years. Amongst them are numerous portraits which serve as a map of the dynamic art scene in the 1960s and 70s in New York. The retrospect has already been on view at the Kunsthalle St. Gallen and is also was at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Bordeaux. Currently, the exhibition is on view at the Tate Modern in Liverpool, and actually Frieze is going to feature Sylvia Slay as their main artist in the next month. In the summer of 2012, the Legacy Initiative worked on a partnership with the Florissant Valley Contemporary Art Gallery in St. Louis to sponsor an exhibition and publication featuring the work of the 2011 Lifetime Achievement honoree Beverly Buchanan. Buchanan, an African-American woman artist, explores Southern vernacular architecture in her work. Buchanan is also the recipient of the John Guggenheim Memorial Fellowship, a Pollock Krasner Award, 2 National Endowments for the Arts Fellowships. She was the recipient of the Anonymous Was a Woman Award and was honored by the College Art Association for Women in the Arts. But sadly, her work is hardly collected at all. The exhibition that ran August 20th through October 13th was the first major retrospect of Beverly's work in the St. Louis area. Home Space Place Memory included more than 40 works on oil pastels and sculptures. A full-color publication with essays by both Lucy Lepard and Patricia Fagan, Ph.D., accompanied the exhibition. WCA is also currently working as a fiscal receiver for work that was exhibited in this exhibition. This serves a threefold purpose. WCA will serve as the liaison between the artists, the collectors, and the museums. WCA lends its 501c3 status to the estate, thereby making donations of that work and purchase of the work tax deductible. And WCA maintains a small administrative fee to actually build future legacy projects. In over 40 years, the WCA has gone through many changes and has weathered many storms. And like any woman of 40, she is standing taller, stronger, more confident, and more defiant than ever. Our mission is to promote women in the arts, to be an activist force that creates positive and long-lasting change in our communities, and as always, to ensure the legacy of women in the arts. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. These are just so informative and good talk. We don't really have much time, but if anybody has a burning question, we have time for a few.
Can we turn the lights up, please?
Yes. Anybody?
I do.
Okay. Yes.
Susan, I wanted to ask you about how you define woman at the National Museum of Women in the Arts.
I think we define it. We actually are grappling with that. Oh.
Yeah.
I believe we define woman along a spectrum, and have had numerous discussions over the notion of self-identification as the key factor in what defines a woman.
Okay. The question is, what is the curatorial process for selecting, I think, subjects and writers for the Women's Art Journal?
Okay, we don't select writers really. Most of the articles that are published come in to us, and we then choose which ones we want to use. So the curatorial process, for the most part, involves what is sent to us. All right, so we're not really, occasionally, I have been so interested in an artist over many years, and these tend to be very well-established artists who have been working for decades and decades. There's a time when I may say, well, you know, it would be nice to have an article on you. Do you have somebody that is available to write about you? But I don't find writers. So, and also, as I said, we don't review exhibitions, which is a problem. It would be nice if there was a journal that did review exhibitions. But we do review exhibition catalogs. And sometimes when those authors review the catalogs, they put in a few remarks about the exhibition, but the review is really about a book. Okay, so there's, you know, when you talk about a curatorial process, I guess the key thing is that artists find someone that is interested in writing about the work, and then the person has to basically write the article and send it to us. And also, I would say also that we're looking for retrospective articles, which is to say, you know, we want someone's whole career.
Okay, Brenda? Okay, so the question is about as women artists get older and sometimes they're taken advantage of in terms of their work, or how do we help protect them? Okay.
You go first.
Okay. Well, I think that's one of the issues that we grapple with all the time, and with so many women artists coming to us asking what to do with their body of work. I think that's why we've tried to do everything we can to educate artists to plan ahead, and I think that's what each of us were really talking about. It's a little bit late, as women are, you know, so elderly that they are taken advantage of. But I would suggest, you know, to all of you who are artists, in order to be written into history, there has to be documentation about who you are and what you've done and where your works are located. Locate a local area in your region archive in which to place your work. Not necessarily in New Jersey, but there are archives all over the country, historical societies, public libraries, who want to document the community of people who are contributing in culture in other areas. I think artists should make sure to talk with legal counsel and do some planning and at least try to protect themselves that way as well. There are a lot of models. There is a book on that Magda Selvison put together several years ago on planning for artists' legacies and estates as one possibility. Talk to other people who have done it. Someone has already mentioned Barbara Hoffman in New York and the Marie Sharp, I've forgotten the rest of it, but program, and that's all I can say other than maybe locally, you know, to work together and have this open discussion. Invite artists from many generations together in your regional chapter, for example, Brenda. This is the perfect time to get that discussion going. It's a hard topic to talk about, thinking about what's going to happen after you're not around. But if we don't do it, we're going to just lose the legacy of so many people.
Yes, in the back.
I just like to say one
sorry,
second
one
to
more
that. I also think it's really important that we as women artists are very proactive in this area. And the only way that we can ensure that this doesn't happen to women artists is really education. If you know women artists that are older and getting in age, you need to be talking to them about their legacy, about their work. Sometimes it's too late, that when somebody passes on and everything has been stored in some warehouse for the last 30 years, those are the situations where things kind of get out of control and women's work is really devalued. And I think that's really what this is also about, is that we don't want the work of other women to be devalued.
Could I say something too?
Just in terms of education, I think that the younger and emerging artists should begin early on with organizing themselves so that it's much easier. I mean, I've been to artist studios where they have just piles of papers, and it's overwhelming to have to deal with cartons upon cartons of unorganized paper. So starting early on, starting even now, please start now.
I'd like to say something about the exploitation and the possibility of that, because that was an issue for Dorothy Dayner. She had an art collection of, her friends, also of David Smith, and there was a great danger. There were some very charming people. She was a lonely person in her 90s, living in her apartment in New York, and there were these charming types who would come in and convince her that they were going to give works to a certain museum collection or university art gallery collection if she would sell it to them for a small sum of money. And I think the answer there in the case of Dorothy was that she was wise enough to make phone calls and ask other people and say, well, and she found out that other people had also been approached by this person, including the widow of Norman Lewis, who was someone that was a friend of hers, Wita Lewis. In any case, this is a danger. So what women artists need who are in that age group, they need an advocate. They need an advocate, and maybe some of the women involved with the Women's Caucus, and certainly younger women artists. I mean, really, honestly, you must befriend these women and try to encourage them and be their sponsor in a way, be their partner as they approach the end of their lives.
Want to pick up with the woman who had the question? Yes. Okay, the question is about what are the attempts to integrate non-Western and women of color, particularly the historical ones, into the museums and the scholarship.
I'm happy to address that. One of the in my quieter moments, the National Museum of Women in the Arts currently does not have an acquisitions budget to purchase works of art. When we finish the endowment campaign that will enable us to be a stable organization, which will complete this year in July, then we can go about creating an acquisitions budget or an acquisitions fund. But the key factor, the way we live, is through the generosity of others. I call myself, what was her name, Blanche Dubois, all the time. Kindness of strangers. So part of the issue for a young organization, a young arts institution, is that kindness. We certainly know what we are able to do in the contemporary arena, and the work of the embassies has been very helpful to us in creating a different kind of demographic in our contemporary collections. But in terms of the historical, I'm still looking for, I'm not looking for Stanley Kowalski, I'll tell you, but I'm looking for someone else.
I just want to mention that there are scholars working on this. There's an exhibition that was in Baltimore at the Walters Gallery on the African presidents and Renaissance art. It's now at Princeton. So there is some work being done, but it's like all work. There has to be funding, and so it moves slowly because there's scarce funding.
Right. Thank you all for coming. If anybody wants to talk a little bit more.